Hey all, one of the most common questions students ask me is how do chess grandmasters think? What makes them so different? How can they calculate so quickly and find the right moves so easily? If you're curious to know, then let's take a look at this together and I'll show you side by side using specific examples how an average player thinks versus how Grandmaster thinks so that you can see the difference and you can elevate your own chess game. Let's find out. Okay, so that's the first example. It is white to move. And please think about it yourself first. How would you play here if you're playing white? You may even have a few tries. Let's say you have three options here, three move candidates. Which moves would you consider in this position? Write it down in the comments below. I'm really curious to know, as well as you can compare how, again, most players think and then how Grandmaster thinks, which we're going to analyze in a moment. Okay, so let me start with the traditional way of thinking, how most players think. In this position, they're looking at this, they think, okay, what do I need to do now? Maybe I need to develop my pieces and play something like e3 and then bring in my bishop out. And it's a fine move. Not the most ambitious move because it does not create much problems for black, but okay, it's an option. Maybe I can do something in the center, take here, but it's just an exchange, doesn't do much. Maybe I can push here, but again, it does not create any threats, so that doesn't really change much. If I try queen g5, taking this pawn, black can simply castle, therefore that doesn't do much. So perhaps, okay, let's settle for e3 and finish white's development with bishop e2 and then casting, something like this. That's how an average player thinks about this position. Now let's come back here to the starting position and let's compare it with the Grandmaster's way of thinking. So the first difference is that Grandmasters don't just think in terms of which move do I need to play right now. Because first they try to evaluate the position overall and comprehend what's going on here. If you think about this overall, then the first thing that I see here is that black made a whole lot of pawn moves without really developing their pieces, because most of them are still underdeveloped, which is certainly a warning sign. It means that black's position is potentially dangerous. You may try to start, as white, a quick attack using the black's underdeveloped position and trying to finish the game quickly. So that's number one. The second thing that you may notice here is that majority of the black's pieces got stuck on the queen side of the board. We can see in this position that black only has the king and the rook on the king side of the board, and the majority of the pieces are standing on the opposite side of the board, which gives you a signal that you may try to start your attack there on this undefended part of the board where the black's king is. And this was one of the methods for determining when it's the time for you to begin your attack by Garry Kasparov, and it's certainly a very good one. Now, having said that, we noticed that black is underdeveloped, their pieces got stuck on the queen side, and you have an idea that you may decide to punish black for that by trying the quick attack on the king side. Now, with that in mind, your thinking process changes significantly. And now you may come to realize that the way to go is the move pawn g4, which previously seemed like the move you would not even consider, but that's how Grandmasters thinks. You can see the difference. Now, after g4, we're going to open up the king side, and after pawn takes, there are a couple options for white to consider. One would be bringing the rook into play by playing rook g1, and it looks like a really good option so that you can take this pawn, and after that, you're gonna attack the other pawn on g7, and I can't even see what can black do against this. This looks pretty deadly, again, because black's pieces got stuck on the other half of the board. This seems killing for white. The other way to go for white would be here to play bishop g2. So this pawn g4 move not only disturbed black on the king side, but also prepared this somewhat fianchetto of the bishop, and it currently hits the rook. And again, this looks pretty bad for black. The only way to cover is playing knight c6. Now you can push in the center with d5, attacking this knight again. Let's say they trade. Now you recapture with the pawn, so the knight has to go somewhere. Then you can play, for example, d6. Once again, opening up this diagonal for the bishop. The rook is being attacked. Now rook b8. And now I guess there are a lot of ways for white to continue the attack. Let's say queen goes over here to g5, threatening queen e7 checkmate, queen takes g7, or queen takes e5. Perhaps black can hold for a little while, but overall the white's attack looks crushing here. And that's how white could finish this off very quickly just by evaluating the position properly. Here's the second example of the game played between Bartosz Sochko against Boots and G. Maybe I mispronounced every letter of their names. I'm really sorry about this. Anyway, it was black to play, and black played here knight takes b3. And that's the question for you to think about. How would you play here as white? Well, it's pretty obvious that you get a recapture, but you have a couple options. You can recapture either with the knight or with one of your pawns, with this pawn or with this pawn. A takes b3 or c takes b3, right? So what's the way for you to go? This pawn or the other one, like pawn take, a takes b3, or that would be knight takes b3, right? So you have three options to consider, and please once again write it down in the comments below. You'll be able later on to compare your thoughts with the thoughts of other chess players. Okay, now let me start once again with the way how an amateur player thinks about this position. So the conventional chess wisdom tells us that we should avoid doubling our pawns, and with that in mind, knight takes b3 looks like a sound option, keeping your pawns here in their beautiful intact pawn structure, right, in their original state. So this looks like a good option. Okay, let's see what else we've got here. If let's say white decided to capture it with a pawn, then again the conventional chess wisdom says that we get a capture towards the center, and therefore a takes b3 seems like the best move positionally, right? So probably a player would choose between pawn takes b3 and a takes b3 or knight takes b3, and then we'll choose one of these two options. Now let's compare this with the Grandmaster's way of thinking. Once again, the difference between the way Grandmaster or compared to an amateur player thinks is that a Grandmasters, they first of all think about the position in terms of planning, okay? So let's forget about this exchange for a second. Overall, what is going on here? What is the white's plan here? What is the black's plan here? Well, we can see the opposite side castlings, and therefore, probably we can expect both players trying to attack the king of each other, right? So white will probably try to push this h-pawn forward, open up the h-file completely, and try to checkmate black king across this h-file. So that is the white's plan. And black will probably try to expand similarly on the queen side, somehow push their pawns or do something to open up the position of the white king and attack on the queen side of the board. Now we know the plans of both sides. Let's keep this in mind and think which move would help white the most to execute their plan. If we take here with the knight, let's think about this for a second. What would black do? Well, black needs to find a way to open up the position there, to expand on the queen side, so they may consider moves such as like pawn to a5, so that on the next move they can keep pushing the pawn forward, play pawn a4, as well as that would attack the knight, giving black one extra tempo, and after that maybe the pawn can be pushed even further, which will help black to get their rook involved and to disturb the white's king. And it actually looks pretty fast for black, right? So that just goes to show you that knight takes b3 is certainly not the best option for white. Okay, how about taking this knight with a pawn? Once again, let's think about the same thing. What is the black's plan here? Well, still the same attack on the queen side, try to open up the position there. Maybe they'll still play pawn a5, aiming to play pawn a4, and since the a file is already opened, there are no white's pawns there, black only needs to remove their own pawn from this file, and that rook gets extremely active. It can even go all the way forward to a1 and give check to the white king. Once again, doesn't look good for white because black's attack goes pretty fast here. Let's take a move back here, which leaves us with the final option to consider pawn c takes b3. Let's think about this for a second. Initially, it looks like a bad positional move because you are removing one pawn from a center to a flank. But if we think about planning, we can see that currently your position on the queen side is really safe. You have a whole lot of pawns there, and it's highly unlikely that black will be able to completely open up one of the files, either a file or b file, right? So you have a lot of pawns there, too much. Even if black, let's say, manages to play a5, a4, and they trade your b3 pawn, you still have the other one, right? This pawn on a2 would still be there. Therefore, you have like one extra pawn to support your castling position. Now, what if black tries to play rook c8, putting their rook against your king? Well, that's something that you can handle very easily by just moving your king one square away, and now you unpinned your knight and everything's good. Now, let's think about this also in terms of the other thing. If, let's say, we ask an average player to evaluate this position, how do you think, what would they say? Is white better or black better, or is it equal? What do you think, by the way? You can also think yourself about this for a second. An amateur player would probably say that the position is, unclear, more or less equal. Maybe white is slightly more active here in the center of the board, so maybe white is slightly better. So now, coming back to a Grandmaster's way of thinking, if I'm playing this as white, I would probably think that I'm already almost winning. or at least it's very, very critical for black. Now, why is that so? Again, it's because I would think in terms of planning, and in terms of planning, I have the super clear plan here, pushing the h-pawn forward, maybe going bishop h6, going after black's king, and what is black going to do? It's completely unclear. It's hard for black to develop their attack on the queen side. Other than that, there isn't much they can do really. So on the couple 5 or 10 moves, white is going to have great progress and black is going to suffer badly. So that's what's going to happen. So black's position is critical, on the brink of disaster, I would say, or they got to find some really creative way to get out of this. So that's once again illustrates you another difference in the way Grandmasters versus amateur players think. They evaluate positions, they think in terms of planning, not just one move ahead. And if you want to know more about this, as well as to practice these skills, then let me invite you to join our current cohort of students who are going through the course, the Grandmasters Positional Understanding. We opened up enrollment just for a few days, because I'm going to provide my personal attention to this group of students so that you can learn all these differences about the positional chess and how you can master these skills. You get exercise, you get my support, as well as support from other students. And this enrollment will only be open for several more days. Therefore, if you're interested, you can click the link on the screen or below the video in the description, get to know all the details and decide for yourself if that's right for you. Also, you're going to get a lot of bonuses, 50% discount, 2 extra courses for free, and again, my support for a limited time only. So if you're interested, check this out, and I can't wait to see you inside.